So I've just started to record. Let me first remind you about homework for Thursday. So for Thursday, there is a preliminary opinion piece due in Blackboard, in the Blackboard blog. Now, what is this preliminary opinion piece? It is just a short thing expressing your opinion about something. And we are going to use this as a sort of practice ground for applying the concepts as we learn them. And I'm going to use the blog tool for that, at least to start with. So I went to the blog tool, and then here are the instructions. So compose this opinion piece in a Google Doc, not a Word doc, is a first thing to just be aware of. Write your opinion about something you care about, or something you hate, or something you love, something you want to see changed. It can be personal, political, related to school, related to work, related to entertainment, you know, TV, not TV, streaming. I've been streaming, I've been watching Korean dramas on TV because there was a, it was on Netflix, because there was one called Crash Landing on You that became very popular, and it introduced a lot of people. Well, and I'm an obsessive sort of person, so I've now watched about 20, I think. And when I say this to anybody, they tell me they look at me like I'm some kind of idiot. And so I was thinking I could do something about that. So it doesn't have to be really serious, but it certainly can be. I mean, we live in a very serious times. There's so much stuff going on with politics and the pandemic. And another thing I might do, I think I mentioned to this class, my mother died in May, and she did not die of COVID, but she had COVID. She went in the hospital in March, spent 2 months there because everything was so confusing. You know, they put her in places where she was infected by COVID. It was just horrible, the whole situation. And so I have a really, really, really strong opinion about the poor handling of the pandemic. I sure hope it's going to get better, but so far it's not really. We're still having all these problems with vaccines. I, however, have gotten a vaccine, and all your faculty should be getting vaccines, which means that maybe next semester everybody will come to campus, which we would really like. So the criteria is that it's something that matters to you, something you'd be willing to think about all semester, and that you write at least 400 words. Could be more, less. It's just a starting point. It is not something that's supposed to be finished. If you've never used a blog before, it is similar to the discussion, but the interface is a little different. And so you have the instructions, you can hide them. So you have a little more space on your computer. And all you do is create a blog entry and start typing. And that's how you do it. And you can save the entry as a draft, or you can post the entry. And it is something that can be edited, and it has all the editing tools. You can add things to a blog. This is the regular rulers for everything. You don't always get the full ruler on discussions because I choose not to give you the full ruler on the discussions. But so you can add things, you can add content, you can add a link. And actually what I'm saying is one way to do it is to link your Google Doc and all these other things that you can do. And then once you post, we'll just post a blah, blah, blah. Then over here on the right, you will have your entries. You can post new entries. It will be indexed by month. So we're about to shift into January. So don't panic when you get to February, because there'll be a February link and then a January link, and you'll have to look at it. And as you can see, all I have here is the title that I wrote. And I've set this up so that but it includes the rubric. Anytime in Blackboard where you have that tic-tac-toe grid, that's the rubric. I'm going to hide this floating meeting controls. Student preview is on. Why is it giving me the option to grade if the student preview is on? And I mentioned this before, when you pull this ruler down, when it's yours, you'll be able to see everybody else's. And I've set it so it's public, and you can comment and look at everybody else's. And there will be points where I ask you to do that. Okay, questions. Anybody have ever had problems with a blog? Okay, so that's what I wanted to remind you of. Second point, and this is going to be more important for those of you who aren't here. I've been trying to figure out how to deal with a synchronous and asynchronous class, which I've never done before. And what I've come up with is that I'm going to do a little form for people to submit if you're not if you're not able to actually be here in person. And let's see, stop share. And what I'm going to do is there'll be a set of questions, and I think I'll come up with a sort of standard set of questions that I'll ask you to do. Those of you who are signed up for the synchronous class but can't come, you can do the same thing. And basically that will count. If you fill out this form, it'll count you as present in the system. And the form will actually ask you to answer something that shows that you actually watched the recording of the class. So it's, you know, so anyway, I will come up with that by the end of today, and we'll do that for from now going on. All right. How did you feel about the readings? Did everybody get to the readings?
Yes.
Yeah. Any of them you really liked or thought they were helpful?
Where was it? What is a good rhetoric, and then the letter for Birmingham is actually really good. Also,
Yeah.
very powerful. I've never read it before in any class, so I thought it was good.
Um, it's kind of remarkable when you go listen to or read, in this case, some of these famous things. You come to understand why they've stayed famous. Um, so, um, did anybody get Anna? What did you think about this? What is good rhetoric?
Um, well, I did take note of like a lot of quotes, like, um, there was one like, if rhetoric is to serve some civic good, it must serve the people who on whom it operates. Like, there are a lot of good quotes like I hadn't really thought of.
Right. And that reminds me, when I read that too, it reminds me, I think it's Cicero that basically starts his thing about rhetoric saying, you know, if we didn't have rhetoric, we probably wouldn't have civilization, because without rhetoric, without being able to communicate to each other, everybody's just going off doing their own thing. And so once you have rhetoric, you have people talking to each other and telling each other to do things, to build things, to, you know, have a, you know, do things this way or do things that way. And you come together as a community. And I think that term community is just really, really important in when you're thinking about rhetoric. So, other thoughts? I have a little mini lecture um, that I thought I would share. Let us hide floating meeting controls. And let us hide that. All right. So my little lecture today is called The Value of Rhetoric and the Rhetoric of Values. At the end, last class, we had this video. You've heard of empty rhetoric, right? Fancy words, blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. No, blah, blah, blah. Let me stop. Everybody can see this video, right? Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I can't. I can't speak for everyone else.
Kind of mind-blowing, because whether we're aware of it or not, rhetoric surrounds us. It plays with our emotions, changes our attitudes, talks us into decisions, makes us buy stuff. Rhetoric is like this real-life matrix, this sort of hidden software that drives our social lives. So, what is rhetoric? The art of persuasion. It's also the art of leadership. The ancient Greeks and Romans thought rhetoric was so important that they trained all their future leaders in the art. Alexander the Great learned rhetoric, Julius Caesar. Later on, Shakespeare studied it. Every one of America's founders, George Washington, John Adams, James Madison, all of them studied rhetoric. And they used this art of persuasion to write the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and then to talk people into supporting our new democracy. So why isn't rhetoric studied today? Well, actually, it is. The leading book on rhetoric, Thank You for Arguing, has been used in more than 3,000 college classes, in high school AP language classes. I guess I should say, why should you care, right? I mean, if you're not going to be a salesperson or a politician, why should you learn about persuasion? And what if you don't want to manipulate people? The thing is, if you don't know rhetoric, you can't see how other people are using it on you. It's a lot easier to manipulate you if you don't know the tools advertisers and politicians and salespeople are using on you. Besides, rhetoric isn't all about manipulation. It's about getting people to like and trust you. It's about writing and speaking better. And it's about learning the ways that words do things, how they can bring people together,
inspire them, or heal them. I'm Christina Fox of ArgueLab. If you want to learn more about rhetoric, go to arguelab.com. Meanwhile, subscribe to our YouTube channel and let me know what some of your biggest persuasion problems are. You have trouble getting people to listen to you, or you freeze up when someone gets mad at you? Let me know. I'll try to answer some of your questions in the weeks to come. No, this is an argument. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. It's just contradiction. No, it isn't. Yes, it is.
So that book, Thank You for Arguing, is the book that I use in persuasive writing. And it is a really good book. And also they have a whole lot of really good videos on their YouTube channel. And so we'll take a look at them as we go on. Does anybody know what the end part of that is? That's not an argument. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Do you know what that is? Does anybody? Well, actually, that's from a Monty Python skit on an argument. I think it's Argue Clinic or something. And we'll take a look at it sometime, or if you have a chance, look for the Monty Python Argue Clinic, because it gives you an interesting idea about. So we've already started talking about some of the negative ways of thinking about rhetoric. It's hollow, it's insincere, it's deceptive, there's lies, it's manipulation, it's opposed to action, it's overly emotional. We saw that in the reading. Of gorgeous or Georgish, I'm not quite sure if it's a hard or a soft G. The encomium of Helen. Does everybody know what encomium means? So it means the defense of Helen, excuse me. And Helen is the, Helen, also called Helen of Troy. She left to go to Troy and because what's his name carried her off. Should have looked at, checked my numbers. And so then the whole Trojan War was fought in order to get her back to Athens. So this defense of Helen was written by Gorgias. Gorgias was a Greek philosopher and rhetorician. He predates Aristotle and Plato. And in fact, we don't know very much about Gorgias because most of his stuff was not saved, because Plato especially really didn't like him and treated it and thought that he was talking about the bad rhetoric. But this is one of the few things that we still have. And so the point of this is he's making a defense of Helen. She wasn't this person who launched 1,000 ships, as I believe Milton said. And the cause of the Trojan War. So Gorgias is trying to defend her. And he gives 4 reasons that she shouldn't be seen as guilty. And the one we're interested in is in line 8. If it was speech that persuaded her and deceived her soul, her defense remains easy. Speech is a great power, which achieves the most divine works by means of the smallest and least visible form. For it can even put a stop to fear, remove grief, create joy, and increase pity. And he's using the word speech for rhetoric. This I shall now prove. All poetry can be called speech in meter. Its hearers shuddered with terror, shed tears of pity, and yearn with a sad longing. The soul, affected by the words, feels as its own an emotion arise by the good and ill fortunes of other people's actions and lives. The inspired incantations of words can induce pleasure and avert grief, for the power of the incantations, uniting with the feeling of the soul, soothes and persuades and transports by means of its wizardry. 2 types of wizardry and magic have been invented, which are errors in the soul and deceptions in the mind. Their persuasion by means of fictions are innumerable, for if everyone had recollection of the past, knowledge of the present, foreknowledge of the future, the power of speech would not be so great. But as it is, when men can neither remember the past, nor observe the present, nor prophesy the future, deception is easy, so that most men offer opinion as advice to the soul. Offer opinion as advice to the soul. But opinion, being unreliable, involves those who accept it in equally uncertain fortunes. Thus, persuasion by speech is equivalent to abduction by force, as she was compelled to agree to what was said, and consent to what was done. It was therefore the persuader, not Helen, who did wrong and should be blamed. That persuasion, when added to speech, can also make any impression it wishes on the soul can be shown firstly from the arguments of the meteorologists, who by removing one opinion and planting another, cause what is incredible and invisible to appear before the eyes of the mind. Secondly, from legal contests, in which a speech can sway and persuade a crowd by the skill of its composition, not by the truth of its statements. And thirdly, from the philosophical debates, in which quickness of thought is shown, easily altering opinion. The power of speech over the constitution of the soul can be compared with the effect of drugs on the bodily state. Just as drugs, by driving out different humors from the body, can put an end either to the disease or to life, so is speech. Different words can induce grief, pleasure, fear, or again, by means of a harmful kind of persuasion, words can drug and bewitch the soul. So that's what she is saying, or he is saying about her. What does this passage say about rhetoric? How is it described?
It can be persuasive for both good or bad.
Okay, what are the good in?
So it can like encourage or like, or it can what was it? I think it was, I made note of it.
Let's use the chat for this. I want everybody to go look at the text. Do you have it on your? Can you pull it up on your computers? I mean, I'll show it some, and then. see if you could share. Where's the chat? Okay. So in the chat, can everybody see the chat? So see if everybody could write down some of the words that Gorgeous uses to describe speech or rhetoric. Can everybody just add at least one thing to the chat? Or two? Yeah, speech is a great power and compares its influence to a drug. So we have the positive things, these emotional things. Persuasion, when added to speech, can make any impression it wishes on the soul. Line 14 is the drugs. And line 12, persuasion by sweet speech is equivalent to abduction by force. I mean, that sounds like kidnapping and even maybe rape. Bewitching, yeah, so it's a wizardry and magic. Now, I know you're all writers, so you probably would love to be able to write with wizardry and magic and affect people however. But it's interesting because most people focus on this, on the negative side, partly because it leads to the negative side. It starts with kind of inspired incantations that can induce pleasure and avert grief. Well, that's pretty positive. But by the end, we have that it's like, you know, you're an addict to some kind of drug. Great job. And so it's not necessarily bad if something can totally get your you know, affect you in that sort of way, take over you. Can you think of some situations where it is? Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Can you think of some situations where that kind of thing is wonderful, is good? How about going to movies? Do you ever feel like a movie sort of takes you over? Or music?
Well, how can you not get motivated to go do karate and want to do a crane kick after watching Karate Kid?
Right.
I mean,
Have you
honestly,
seen the
music
new
has a
one?
very big, influence over a lot of people, especially like myself. Music can change your mood into, if you're, like if you're sad, you're most likely going to listen to like depressing music, make yourself even more sad, or you'll try to like cheer yourself up by listening to pop music. Or if you're angry, want to work out, you'll listen to rap music or heavy metal or whatever you decide to listen to. But music has a very big influence over how people feel, how people think. And now, like, they're taking song lyrics into courtrooms and using it as evidence. So
They are?
Wait,
How?
they are?
yeah, they have now made it legal to use song lyrics in court cases as evidence to see if they were actually planning a murder or not.
Huh. I often think of song lyrics as more emotional than anything else, but I definitely see their persuasive thing. So what we're going to be trying to do throughout this semester actually is thinking about rhetoric as a more neutral term instead of something horrible, and think about it as like any tool that you use. It could be used for good or bad. And there was some theorist, rhetorical theorist, who did a comparison, and I cannot remember who said this, but he said rhetoric is just like your arm. And you can take your arm and hit somebody with it, or you can take your arm and you can design beautiful things and hug somebody and do all these positive things. And so it really depends on the user or other things of whether the rhetoric is good or bad. So I was going to talk about sort of 3 theories of good rhetoric that were implied by either the readings or stuff that I was thinking about this week. And I'm going to use the rhetorical triangle as sort of organizing. I'm pretty sure you've been introduced to the rhetorical triangle. The 3 elements of any rhetorical situation would involve the speaker or the writer, the audience or the listener or the reader, and then the message, what they're trying to say, the subject matter. Aristotle talked about 3 types of appeals which focus on each one of the corners of the triangle. I guess it's angles of the triangle. Ethos, focusing on the speaker or the writer. Logos, focusing on the message, and also it's come to mean focusing on the logic, the content of it, as opposed to the delivery of it, the reason. And then pathos, which tends to focus on emotion, but it has to do with any kind of relationship between you and the audience. So, oh, good grief. I have an error on my, I think I switched these. So this should say ethos, focusing on the speaker. And so Cotillion said that a good orator or good rhetoric is when a good man is speaking well. so that the person is good to begin with. And so whatever they're saying is going to be good rhetoric. Which is one way of looking at it. Another way to look at it, I switched my ethos and my logo, so this should say logos, is reflected in the in the article that you read about good and bad rhetoric. Now we're going to see 1327. Micah, it said you were talking.
No, unless it's counting the noise I made from trying to put my blanket back on me because it's freezing in my
Okay.
office.
So I don't know if you guys noticed, but this Eon, it also does these things as podcasts. This Eon is a new online writing place, and I found some really interesting kind of things there. Just as an aside, but here we're going to listen to the end of
the Gettysburg Address, full as it is with feeling and urgency, comes from its invitation to the listener to consider the basis on which the U.S. was founded. The persuasiveness of the speech consists not just in its ability to stir the passions of an audience and instill conviction, but also in its ability to get ordinary Americans to think more conscientiously than they had previously about the coherence of their own ideals and the application of those ideals in practice. The audience is moved, but also, in Plato's sense, self-moved, to the extent that they are led to think for themselves. If this is right, we can see why the assumption that rhetoric serves as a pale substitute for reason and argument is too simplistic. Good rhetoric also does the work of reason, though in a different form than philosophical argument. Plato came to be pessimistic about the rhetoric of his contemporaries in democratic Athens, which might be why he...
Uh-oh. Well, I'm not quite sure why it stopped reading, but I will finish it. Plato came to be pessimistic about the rhetoric of his contemporaries in democratic Athens, which might be why he set up his academy as a place where the practice of independent thinking could flourish. Yet there have been moments in history since then that should leave us more hopeful about the prospects for good rhetoric, or at least less doubtful. The important question for us today is, can we conceive of a piece of political rhetoric that is both highly persuasive and at the same time spurs independent thought? This is not a rhetorical question. If we can't, we might be in trouble. So I thought this was a really interesting way to think about this. To go back to my rhetorical triangle, what the writer is saying is that the speaker, when it's a good rhetoric, is somehow getting, so the speaker somehow probably using his ethos or their ethos, is not like treating the audience as somebody to be drugged, but rather somehow to reach out to that audience and get them to actually think. You know, one of the interesting things, this is an aside, is Plato didn't like writing. Writing was just becoming popular, or invented really, at the time of Plato. He didn't really like writing very much in most situations, because he said writing didn't allow you to talk back to it, unlike speaking. And so this gets back to this point that the idea of good rhetoric is not to just sort of seduce you into this dreamlike state, but rather to somehow trigger your thinking about what's going on in in the speech. So then the third part of the triangle is I was thinking about a lot because this was a piece in Biden's speech, his inauguration speech. St. Augustine is a Catholic priest, and he refers to him that way, but he's also a great philosopher and a great rhetorician. And although ultimately his rhetoric ends up saying, you know, the only thing you should value is sort of God and religion, or, you know, whatever. Along the way, he has a lot to say about rhetoric. And this quote that Biden used actually relates. So I have a place. So I have a link that to the speech. So the written speech was put down in on the White House page. You can always get speeches. But just about halfway through, he says this quote: "Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love." And I'm going to play that part.
Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth, and defeat the lies.
So this idea, let's see, I think I have St. Augustine somewhere here. Here's the actual passage from St. Augustine. This is from his City of God, Book 19, chapter 24. "A people is an assemblage of reasonable beings bound together by a common agreement as to the objects of their love. Then, in order to discover the character of any people, we have only to observe what they love. Yet whatever it loves, if only it is an assemblage of reasonable peoples and not of beasts, and is bound together by an agreement as to the objects of love, it is reasonably called a people, and it will be a superior people in proportion as it is bound together by higher interests, inferior as it is in proportion as it is bound together by lower." So the first thing is St. Augustine, I was, exploring this whole use of St. Augustine, and there were some people that were really criticizing Biden's use of this because ultimately, in St. Augustine's view, the higher interest that bound people is God. And so these lower things having to do with the earthly world the city of God on earth, they kind of criticized, but others came back and said, no, that St. Augustine really did believe that, you know, you can be a city of God on earth, and you have shared values. And so this is how it relates to rhetoric. When you are speaking to people who have values. And the extent to which your values agree or align with the values of your audience, the extent to which you will be able to be persuasive. And this is why I put St. Augustine's point of view on the audience angle of the triangle. Because what St. Augustine ultimately is saying is that good rhetoric is rhetoric that expresses the audience's values and sometimes can inspire audience to better values. So if you think back to Biden's speech right there, what are the values that that audience is sharing with him?
I know he said opportunity, truth.
So he explicitly states the values that that he says that Americans share. Notice when he says towards the end, he says, and we value truth. There's a big response from the audience. Why is there a big response from the audience?
I guess because they agree with it.
They agree with it. What else? What else is that audience thinking?
Probably the past 4 years of the constant, you know, saying things are lies and, you know, just pot stirring.
Although he wants to speak to Trump supporters, he is definitely not speaking to Trump supporters right there, right? He is speaking to people who believe that Trump has been telling lies, and therefore they will kind of see that automatically as, you know, a value. So this issue of values in the community and speech, there is both explicit expression of values, but even more, there's implicit expression of values. So you could listen to Biden's speech, and every point where he is alluding to Trump in a negative way, you could figure that out. And he doesn't have to say anything negative about Trump. He just alludes to it. He says something like Trump or truth, and he assumes that his audience is going to know that he is alluding to the whole issue of truth versus lies. Now, I want to keep reiterating, I'm not trying to say this because I'm saying that Trump's a bad person and Biden's a better person. I'm trying to say this as a way of talking about how the rhetoric that is being used expresses the values of the audience. So when Trump says, make America great again, to somebody who believes him, you know, who supports him, whatever they have in mind of what make America great again means, they seem to have that understanding. And those who do not agree with Trump, they have a different understanding of what Trump is saying, or a different perspective of the content of what Trump is saying. And that, I think, is actually the reason why it's so hard to talk to everybody when you're across the political divide, is because a politician is generally talking to people who share their values and doesn't have to go into great detail, and can use those shared values. So we'll do an activity later on about the slogans that Trump and Biden had. So you have Trump saying, "Make America Great Again." And what he's saying, there's a whole set of values about what's wrong with America that his audience shares with him. Or if Biden said, "Build back better," there's a whole set of values that his audience, his supporters, would share with him of what had been destroyed and what needs to be built back. And so one of the cool things, and also the bad things about rhetoric, is that so much is not actually stated in the process of convincing people. And I think a lot of that has to do with this idea of a community being bound together by shared values. And that, so good rhetoric, if we see it as good, is rhetoric in which somehow the writer or the speaker has figured out what the values are of the community, or what the values should be, and somehow speaks to that, enabling them to, get to their point. This is kind of a complicated idea. Does this make some sense? So a summary, what I'm saying is that there are 3 ways we could define good rhetoric. Good rhetoric could be from the speaker's perspective. That is, it's a good person, a good man speaking well, which is what Quintilian said. Good rhetoric could be from the content perspective, the logos. And that's, I think, what the the writer in the Eon article was trying to say, was that if it's not just sort of seducing them with words, but rather engaging the mind and getting you to think about independent thought, move the soul from the Plato terms, and soul is a much broader term than we may think of it. Good rhetoric is rhetoric that makes you think. And then the third way is from the audience perspective. Good rhetoric is rhetoric that appeals to the audience's values, and or maybe invites the audience to have even better values, which I think is kind of what Martin Luther King does in his speech to the other ministers. He kind of starts with the idea that, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be so, non-violently violent and act with all this. But he moves to the point of, as ministers, you guys have to do the right thing, basically, and be supportive and, work towards equity and desegregation and the various things. I saw a Black Sabbath concert once, It was really loud. But I was trying to be cool. I think I was in junior high. Okay. Let me stop. Questions? Okie doke. So what is homework? Tell me what your homework is.
Well, that 400-word blog thing due on the 27th.
Yep. Anybody have any ideas of what they're going to do?
I'm still thinking about mine.
Probably sexual assaults in the military, since it strikes close to home, and then the things that happened to Vanessa. I'm still angry about that, so that's been my crusade for the past 2 semesters.
Vanessa.
What was it Gillian from Fort Hood?
Oh. So are you still in the military, or are you?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. No. I mean, the haircut gives it away. I'm definitely not part of them anymore.
Oh, that's
but,
right. That's right. That's right.
No. 2 years free.
Anybody else have a possible topic? No? Okay, so have a really great couple days, and I will see you on Wednesday. Make sure you've finished the blog before class. Okay?
Okay.
All right. See you later.
Have a good one.